Just briefly, I've kind of shortened some introductions because I wanted to get with the program and get everybody started. First of all, one of our debaters is going to be Michael Farris. He's over on the end. He's Chancellor of Patrick Henry College and Chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. He was the founding president of each organization, and during his career as a constitutional appellate litigator, he has served as lead counsel for the United States Supreme Court, 8 federal courts, and the appellate courts of 13 states. He's been a leader on Capitol Hill for over 30 years and is widely respected for his leadership in the defense of homeschooling, religious freedom, and the preservation of American sovereignty. He and his wife, Vicki, have 10 children and 17 grandchildren. So let's give him a hand. Very good. And sitting next to him is Senator Rob Standridge. In 2012, he was elected to the Oklahoma Senate to represent District 15, which is part Mormon. In the 54th legislature, he was appointed to Vice Chairman of the Health and Human Services, and he serves on the Transportation, Rules, Energy, and Appropriations Committees. He brings vast business experience to his office as senator. He's a lifelong entrepreneur. He was the first in his family to graduate from college. He has a BS in pharmacy, and my dad was a pharmacist, so I'm kind of partial to pharmacy. And he and his wife, Lisa, own 2 pharmacies. They bought one in 95, and then they bought a second one. And then he taught himself to write computer programs and created a software program called Compound Assist. And then he started a business venture providing pharmacies through a company that he started called Health Engineering with products that help with the compounding issue. And I'm glad to see that because it's hard to find compounding pharmacists or ones that know what to do. So let's give him a hand. And then on the far side over here, we have Bob Donahue, who is the section leader for the John Birch Society and vice president of OPAC. He is a homeschooling father of 3, and he does intellectual property, IT stuff. And he also likes to have a lot of fun. So he organized and spearheaded the well-received Stop Obamacare Penalties rally, and we had rallies all over the state, and he's shown himself to be a diligent hard worker who is faithful in keeping conservatives around the state informed about what's happening in the legislature. Let's give him a hand. And then Charlie Meadows in the center here. Charlie is a member of the John Birch Society since 1998, and he, as well as being co-founder and president of OPAC, which is the Oklahoma Conservative Political Action Committee. He provides a wealth of knowledge and experience to conservative groups all over the state. He's been gracious in keeping us informed with behind-the-scene observations, and he serves as a mentor for many politicians because of his well-integrated conservative worldview. There's Charlie. And our moderator tonight is Dr. James Taylor. He's pastor of Christ Church of Norman, which is currently meeting in Norman High School on Sunday mornings at 10:30. Dr. Taylor is a dear friend of ours, and he's created a DVD called A Pebble in Your Shoe, Why I'm a Republican, which is available through the Frederick Douglass Foundation at info@tfdf.org. So, Dr. Taylor. All right, now I've kind of done my part. I don't know what else to do other than to say I do have the flyers about the next meeting back at the back, and there's a teapot for donations, and we're so glad you're here. So I guess I have somebody's microphone.
Dr. Taylor's. Thank you, Jim and Mallory. Again, my name is JT, is what I go by, so when the doctor just simply means I paid a lot of money for my education, is what that means. But I'm going to be the moderator. Rob had called me a couple of days ago and said, JT, I was really sad to hear that you're a moderate Republican. And I said, Rob, no, I am the moderator. Big difference. So he says, oh, okay, then that's all right then. I want to start off by saying this. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I don't think anyone would doubt that what we've got going on in Washington is pure insanity. But part of the problem of that insanity is the people who vote for the people who get being placed back in those roles. That's part of the insanity as well. And so there needs to be something done. I don't think anybody would argue that. So what this debate is going to be talking about is the Article 5 convention format that we're going to have. And I'm going to be reading what the rules are. They had me, initially I didn't have any rules, so I was just going to have it be a smackdown up here, but they said, no, you got to have some rules. So we got rules, and so it's not going to be a smackdown. So let me just read. I know you guys can read, but you don't have these rules. So let me just read this, and so you'll know how things will flow. Resolved that the state legislature should employ the provision of Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution that authorizes them to apply for a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments that would curtail the abuse of power by the federal government. Here are the rules. Number 1, opening statements will be 10 minutes per side to be divided between speakers as their team chooses. Number 2, cross-examination will be 10 minutes per side, 1 speaker per side at a time. Responding teams will determine which speaker answers. Number 3, questions from the audience will be 34 minutes. Questions to be submitted in writing, which is what you've already done, and in advance. Moderator will read the questions. First question will be posed to the affirmative, alternating between the teams thereafter. Each side will have 2 minutes to answer. 1 speaker only per team, and the team gets to choose. Following the responses by the team to which the question was posed initially shall have a 1-minute rebuttal. Okay. 4th, rebuttal speeches will be 4 minutes per side, and the negative will get to speak first. And the closing summation, 4 minutes per side, and affirmatives will speak last. To my left is the affirmative, and to my right is the negative. So at this time, we will have the opening statements, excuse me, beginning, you know, no one ever said who was going to be, they don't have who's going to be doing first, so the opening will be you guys, okay.
Thank you, JT, appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. I think this is an important discussion, and I think we had a really interesting dialogue yesterday, so I appreciate you coming. Yeah, I was just joking on the moderate, JT, although I would clarify that from your perspective, the affirmative is on the right, the opposed is on the left.
But in reality, the negative is on the right. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's okay. But I know you're going to be asking us questions. We're going to be asking questions of each other. But I thought I'd start the evening asking you a few questions, if you don't mind. So kind of dovetailing on JT's comments, who here in the room believes that the federal government is out of control? I think that's unanimous. You should be in the Senate. So how many here believe that we have branches of the government that are running away, that are runaway branches of the government? And I'll list those for you. Congress, Supreme Court, and the executive branch, right? So we have 3 that are runaway, right? So how do we rein these in? Does anybody here have any thoughts on?
How about the Federal Reserve? Are you going to throw them in there?
Oh, sure, 4 then. So how many here have a thought on if our founders were here today, what would they say? How would they say that we could rein in the federal government? Does anybody have a thought on what the founders would say?
Now, you take their net assets when they got elected and compare to what their net assets are now after they've been in office for so long. And if they started out with $100,000 net assets and they've been up there for 8 years and they got $8 million of their worth of net assets, they need to send them people back home.
Well, that's a thought. Well, I think that in my studies, and I've been passionate about this for a number of years, and since elected I've become more passionate about it. When you study the Constitution and the words of our founders, it becomes crystal clear what they thought would help rein in the federal government, and that is an Article 5 Convention of States to amend the Constitution. With that, I'll give the rest of my time to Dr. Farris.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you all here in Oklahoma. I was born in Arkansas, and I was telling people the other day, the person from Arkansas that marries an Okie, an Okie that marries an Okie, is called a social climber. So it's it is a real privilege to be here in Oklahoma. I want to indicate some of the people that are supporting the position that I'm taking tonight, including Senator Tom Coburn. I spent about an hour with Senator Coburn in his office last week. He is fully on board with the efforts we're talking about tonight. Glenn Beck is fully on board with the efforts we're talking about tonight. David Barton is fully on board with the efforts we're talking about tonight. Mark Levin is fully on board, and a number of other conservative leaders that are very well respected. The day has passed that conservatives are all on one side of this issue. Legitimate, serious, thoughtful, well-read conservatives are on both sides of this issue today. And it's a time that we all take a fresh look at it and come with an open mind to see what the truth is, to see what American history truth is. We shouldn't get our American history from part of the history like Common Core would like us to have. We should dig deep and always look at the original source documents and not what somebody else said about American history. So with that kind of introduction, I want to advance 3 principles in tonight's debate. First is that the federal government is going to destroy liberty, and I'm going to explore that a little bit in depth because we have to understand how they're going to destroy liberty if we're going to fashion a correct remedy. The second point is that the solution that we craft needs to cut to the heart of the problem rather than running around the peripheral edges trying to get at symptoms. We need to get to the heart and the root of the problem. Third, we cannot let distrust of the Constitution, distrust of the Founding Fathers, or distrust of the American people dissuade us or give in to fear based on those distrusts as the basis for failing to take action. Nor should we let that same distrust of the Founding Fathers, distrust of the Constitution, distrust of the American public make us choose weak and ineffective solutions that cannot possibly solve the problems that are facing this country. So with those criteria, I want to review the problems that we've got in this country. First problem. The Supreme Court has ruled under the General Welfare Clause that there are absolutely no constitutional limits on the power of Congress to tax and spend. No limits whatsoever. Congress can tax and spend for any purpose it wants. That's not what the founders intended, but our government is living under a form of the Constitution, not the Constitution as written, but the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. I don't want to live in a country where there are no constitutional limitations on the power of the federal government to tax and spend. We've got to fix that problem. Number 2. Since World War II, we have never been in a declared war, ever again. There are some wars that we've fought that if I was a member of Congress and I was asked to declare war, some of them I would have voted to declare war because I think they were the right thing to do. But the founders wanted us to not only do the right thing substantively, there's always 2 rules that Congress and state legislatures and all governments should always obey. That is, we want to do the right thing morally and do it in the right way, which normally means in accordance with the Constitution. And so the right thing in the right way in war is for Congress to declare war. And so every war, 100,000 Americans have died, even though it's always been one man's war since that time. I don't want to live in a country where one man can decide whether young American men, and unfortunately, increasing numbers, young American women, can die in war. That should be the decision of the entire nation through Congress. Third, I don't want to live in a country where treaties are used to control the domestic policy of the United States. Barbara Boxer hates my guts. John Kerry hates my guts. Dick Durbin hates my guts. I have faced them down on the floor of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where I testified 2 times in the last 18 months against the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I have been the leader of the Sovereignty Coalition on 2 human rights treaties that affect the family particularly. I'm a member supporting that coalition on all the other treaty opposition, but I lead the charge in Washington, D.C. on those 2 things. I don't want to live in a country where treaties are the supreme law of the land on domestic issues. That's what's happening in our country, and we need a constitutional correction to that, because the Supremacy Clause contains a situation the founders never anticipated. That is, treaties that were aimed not at how nations treat nations, but at the domestic policy of the United States. Fourth, the most important provision of any governmental organization is who has the power to make rules. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution gives us the answer to who has the power to make rules. All legislative authority is vested in the Congress of the United States. Yet there are 200 volumes of the Code of Federal Regulations containing thousands of laws that Congress has never voted for. They are crippling our industry, oil industry, agriculture are crippled by unconstitutional regulations because we are not enforcing the real meaning of Article 1, Section 1. The Supreme Court takes the position, well, they're not really laws. They're kind of laws, not really laws, and they let it slide through. We need to have a constitution where all legislative authority is vested in the elected representatives of the people, because if we don't like the law, we can throw the rascals out. We will never get the solutions to these constitutional problems other than through an Article 5 convention. It is the only way. The Founding Fathers intended and put Article 5 in the Constitution for the express reason when the federal government gets out of control, the states need to have a process that they control every substantive step along the way to be able to stop the abuse of all these things. We can stop the abuse of every problem that I've talked to you about through an Article 5 convention of the states, an application that I've written with the help of Rob Nadelson and has making progress in a number of states. It's passed in Georgia. It passed in the Senate committee in Arizona while I was sitting up here preparing. And it's going through in a number of states. We are going to save the republic. I refuse to use weak, ineffective arguments that aim at the periphery. I want to use strong medicine. I don't want to get in a knife fight. You remember Indiana Jones? He had a knife fight with that big Egyptian. I don't want to get in a knife fight with a big Egyptian. I want to pull my pistol and shoot him in the gut. And that's what we need to do, and shoot the Leviathan in the gut with an Article 5 convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think they had you check your pistols at the door, so that was a good thing. Thank you. Next, Charlie.
I would agree that our problems are very severe in this country. And, oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I agree that our problems are very severe in this country. So the real question is, how do we solve these? How do we best deal with this situation? My differences with our opponents tonight are not over the problem, but the best solution to the problem. It's been 227 years since we've had a constitutional convention. Never had one since the one in Philadelphia. That's how difficult it is to call one. This is a book right here, The Liberty Amendments, by Mark Levin. Came out with several amendments. He admitted that it would be difficult and time-consuming to pass any of these amendments. One of the worst ideas he has is, and you may not understand this at first, but it's term limits on our Supreme Court justices. He admits that if that were to pass, and probably would take 7 to 14 years for that to happen, he admits the first two to go would be Scalia and Thomas, the two conservatives, plus the one moderate. How do you like Obama replacing them, or Hillary Clinton replacing them? Now, the reality is this, folks. There is a way to approach this and approach this quickly. It's called nullification. It is where the states find the courage, your state lawmakers find the courage to begin to evaluate every federal law, judicial edict, and presidential directive or order, and those that are outside of Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers, simply come to a place where we begin to nullify those laws by not complying with those laws. That is the way to quickly move to set this down. Now, it won't work, folks, if we don't get a number of people understanding that how it can work, and particularly put a governor, your state senators, and your state representatives in office who have that courage to start standing up to the federal government and pushing back on the federal government. If that occurs, and that catches on like a wildfire in other states, we'll begin to simply roll back many of these federal laws and push back on these federal laws and nullify them, and we begin to restore federalism, and we put the federal government, it's out of its cage right now, back into its proper relationship with the states. That's what we need to be doing. I'm going to yield the rest of my time to my partner.
Like Charlie, I happen to agree with Senator Standridge and Dr. Farris on the whole question of the problem. We do have a serious problem in America. What we don't want to do is kill the patient while we're trying to apply the cure. That's actually what we want to be careful of. You know, the idea of a convention, let me ask you something. How many people have been here to a state convention, like the GOP state convention? Yeah, a few folks, all right. You ever notice how the rules can be taken advantage of? Right. See, it's the same thing here in these conventions. I'm going to give you the golden rule to conventions. He who makes the rules controls the outcome. You know what I mean? He who makes the rules controls the outcome. For example, the founding of our nation, we had a miracle. George Washington called our Constitution a miracle. I agree with him. It's a fabulous document that our founders actually developed. And to listen to the stories of what they did, the discussions and arguments they had on both sides, I sure wouldn't keep up with them. They were very gifted men. They were very prepared for doing what they did. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean they didn't set rules and take advantage of them. In New Hampshire, the governor there actually was called the president. But what he did, when he got the instructions that came from the Continental Congress, he said, he called, instead of going with the regular legislative session, he called a special session in December in a coastal city or near the coast of New Hampshire. What that meant was one group of people, the Federalists who were favoring it, they had easy access. In the upper parts of the state where a lot of the anti-Federalists were, a lot of them couldn't make it. These down there as state legislators, they couldn't make it. It took 6 days to get a quorum. It skewed the results. He who sets the rules controls the outcome. Oh, they got the rules down for the convention they were going to have in their state. The Federalists set it all up. When they had the convention, it too was in February in the winter. Guess what? A lot of the delegates from the outer areas that were the anti-Federalists who may oppose what was going on or may want to alter it and have objections to the proposed Constitution, they couldn't make it. Their numbers were thin. He who sets the rules controls the results. It got ratified. Boston had an interesting occurrence. A lot of the delegates came and they had their money to pay for their provisions and to stable the horses and the whole bit, but the convention ran long. They were going into debt. They're growing broke during the convention. A rumor floated, if you vote in favor of ratification, we'll make sure all your bills get paid. 400 delegates. It passed by a 19-vote margin. The state coffers, what the state treasurer said was empty, okay, that was declared ahead of time too. Well, that rumor, guess what? They didn't get any extra money. They got stiffed. But they didn't know it until after the vote. South Carolina was so bad in terms of what they did, they grossly underrepresented the backcountry where a lot of the anti-Federalists would. They had 4 times the population and yet 2/3 the number of delegates if you look at it. That is how they set it up. It was so bad there were several delegates that refused to attend a convention. They said the outcome had already been determined. You see, folks, it's all about the rules. It's all about the rules. Now, what about the rules today? Oh, by the way, they produced a great document. I'm very happy, Dr. Farris, that we have a Constitution. What about today? The Convention of the State folks would have you believe that Congress has a custodial role, and that is they gather the applications from the state, and when they have 34, they make the call. All right? And basically, they determine the location and date for a convention. And then at the end, or whenever they get around to it, they determine the mode of ratification. Are the state legislators going to pass this, or does it go to a convention within each state? Well, those two things, you know what Congress did? In the late 70s, early 80s, when it looked like we were getting close to having an Article 5 convention, 32 states had applied for a convention. 2 more were needed. It was coming down fast. So what they started to do was to gear up, okay? Congress, members of Congress in both chambers initiated, sir, 41 different bills to establish rules for the convention. These rules included apportionment of congressional delegates among the states, specific standards to state petitions, formulas and delegate qualifications, convention procedures and funding, specific limits for the life of a convention, ratification procedures, and judicial review. You got this piece of paper that was handed out. If you take a look on here, how do I know this? All right, I just kind of read this off the front page. How do I know this? Because there is an organization called the Congressional Research Service. This is an authoritative service or source for our Congress when they're looking at legislation. They're the ones that put together a 41-page document letting Congress know what they can do. They're doing this today. They keep this document up to date. The most recent one came out just a few days ago. And our Congress today is being told, hey, back in the day, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, 41 bills, you know. What happened then was the states began to rescind their calls, so they didn't need to complete the process of passing those bills. But guess what? They're on the shelf, folks. They're waiting. Was Obamacare written in a few days? No. That bill was waiting in the wings. We got the same thing going on. Congress is going to run the roost on this thing. As a matter of fact, because the states are going to vary on what they call for, all right, what's going to happen? Congress has already decided. House Judiciary Committee made this decision, all right, said, look, we need to get all these, when this convention meets, we need to get all these proposed amendments and everything, and what they do, and we need to make sure each one qualifies, so we're going to pick and choose. Oh, hey, if you don't like the results and you want to take them to court, go ahead. Let the Supreme Court pick and choose. What do you think? Folks, let me tell you something. That's the problem. We may think we circumvent Congress. In reality, they're going to insert themselves. Do you believe the states of our day are going to stand up to it and nullify whatever they come out with? Do you believe Congress will just lay passive? I think they insert themselves. They will not leave the temptation alone. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. It is now time for the cross-examination. Before we go that route, if you have questions, please pass them to the center aisles. And Ted, can you go and start gathering those questions now before we get through it? And Ted's going to screen the questions so that there's duplicate questions. We're not asking the same question over and over again. So that's what the purpose of that is. So now we have our cross-examination, and we start over here with you guys.
I would like to ask either one of you here if, as we all understand that the federal government is out of its bounds, it's become a soft tyrant today, yet our founders in the Bill of Rights gave us 2 amendments to deal with that, the 9th and the 10th Amendments. And I'm wondering if you guys have just ceded the reality of the 9th and 10th Amendment, have given up on it, or how else would you enforce or use the 9th and 10th Amendment to roll back the overreach of the federal government?
Thank you, Charlie. I'm not opposed to those efforts of nullifying or pushing back on overreach. But when you look at history, you know, our founders, especially James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, both said time and time again, the ultimate course of nullification, if it's to be successful, is an Article 5 Convention of the States, from even talking about Alien and Sedition Acts, nullification resolutions, to nullification crisis. And I'll give it over to Mike if he wants to say a couple words on that.
Sure. I filed a brief in a case that's pending in the Supreme Court right now, where they're trying to use treaties to give Congress the power over what is really a state crime. And I've argued the 10th Amendment. And so you've got an Attorney General in this state who's aggressively arguing the 10th Amendment. I've consulted with him and helped him on 10th Amendment litigation. In the back scenes, I haven't appeared for him, but just informal consulting. And we continue to fight 10th Amendment battles. We use it. We use the 9th Amendment. I've argued the 9th Amendment in court. I will continue to do so. And so I don't believe in giving up on any part of the Constitution, including Article 5.
Okay, my follow-up question on that then, and I understand, and Scott Pruitt's doing a wonderful job on that in the state of Oklahoma. I understand that in the courts, but we do realize that when you go to the courts, which is the gatekeeper, or shall we say the fox watching the hen house for the federal government, quite often we don't get a very good case out of the Supreme Court. And so again, I come back with the concept of what can state governments do, your state leaders, your governor, your lawmakers do. Do you believe there's any place for them in the realm of nullification?
Well, it depends. You know, nullification covers a wide variety of activities. If it's like, don't take money from the federal government that requires you to do Common Core, we ought to do that. We ought to nullify that. When I ran for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, my running mate was elected governor. I lost against the incumbent as Lieutenant Governor, but I convinced him not to take federal money for education in a similar program. Didn't last that long, but I convinced him for a while. And so there are things we can do that we can nullify in that sense. States can't possibly nullify going to war without a declaration of war. States can't possibly nullify the interpretation of the General Welfare Clause. States can't possibly nullify the Interstate Commerce Clause misinterpretation. States can't nullify all 200 volumes of the Code of Federal Regulations. You can nullify a little bit here and there. You can work around the periphery. You can fight battles, but we don't need to be fighting the battle of particular battles. They assert the ability to tax and spend for any reason they want, and I want a constitutional rule that says there are limits on their ability to tax and spend, and until we have that constitutional limit, we don't have an effective weapon of warfare.
Oh, I can, okay, all right, great. Senator Standridge, as I'm sure you know, our Constitution within Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Constitution, requires a balanced budget. The Supreme Court, the Oklahoma Supreme Court just a few years ago, made a ruling that basically said, you know, you can borrow money and everything and go into debt, but you just can't bind future legislators to pay it back. Well, as you know, we have some $2 billion in debt right now. All right, maybe more about that. Do you feel at liberty to tell those lenders that you're not going to pay it back and to just drop them all in a single bill?
No, I think where you're getting to is how do we constrain debt within government, whether it be at the state, the federal level. With talking about an Article 5, we're certainly talking about the federal level. I'd say the only way that we can truly do that with a sensible balanced budget amendment, which would take obviously amending the Constitution through an Article 5 process. I would add that Article 5 process is not new. We've let a runaway Congress propose over 1,000 amendments to the Constitution. And so the fact that we allow them to do it, but we don't trust our state legislators that are right next door to us do it, is a little baffling to me. But with regards to constraining the debt at the state, I think we should work towards doing that. I think you should try to hold your legislators accountable to that. I think that's something we should work towards. I don't disagree with that. But here at this meeting, I think we should focus on the federal government. What can we do to rein in the federal tyranny that we're under today? And like our founders experienced 200 plus years ago, I feel like we're experiencing similar tyranny today.
All right, as a follow-up to that, you see the difficulty there. Our Supreme Court just decided—
It's supposed to be questions.
Oh, yes. Dr. Farris, in light of how the Supreme Court, the Oklahoma Supreme Court, basically gave a pass for our state legislators to accumulate $1 billion of debt in spite of the fact that we have a balanced budget requirement in the Oklahoma State Constitution, all right? Why would you ever think that our federal Supreme Court wouldn't come out with some similar ruling to override a balanced budget amendment such as Representative Band's proposed in his provision for a limited Article 5 convention this year? Why wouldn't the Supreme Court just overrule it?
Well, let me tell you how I would draft a balanced budget amendment, and then we can evaluate it together. Balanced budget, first of all, I would define that you have to not spend more than last year's actual income. No estimates, last year's actual income. Number two, the spending, there's two categories of spending. Any actual cash expenditures and any incurring of debt, like Social Security debt or Medicaid or anything like that. That counts as spending, so all spending has to be limited by last year's actual income. Then you're going to have override procedures. Two, in my version. Number one, if there's a declared war, no more of these undeclared wars, a declared war. Second, if there's a national emergency, you can never define that effectively, but you can put limits on it structurally. 75% of both houses of Congress are required to have a declared emergency, but the third year in a row they declare the emergency, all members of Congress are permanently ineligible to ever run for any office or hold any appointed position in the federal government forever. Now, if they're just trying to buy votes, they won't do it. Now, if there really is a national emergency and our country is facing some dire consequences, they can do it the third year in a row and lay down their offices and say, the country's so important that we needed to do that. But no more buy-in votes through that. Which is all to say, if you write your balanced budget amendment correctly, you won't have the problem. The second thing is your Supreme Court's not doing their job correctly. You fix that. And I don't know what the problem is here because I've never read your balanced budget amendment in Oklahoma, and I don't know how you pick the Supreme Court here. But I would aim at both those things, and if I got a problem, I'm going to go fix both those problems.
Senator Standridge, what's my time here? Real quickly, I believe that there's only one bill related to this in the state of Oklahoma, and it's a call for a balanced budget amendment. Now, it's been defeated already this year. But I think you're probably in support of it. And one of the provisions is it says that Congress shall convene a convention of the states for the purpose of proposing amendments. And this specifically says that the way the wording is the budget must be balanced with exception of national emergency. Could you define in the words or terms of Washington what a national emergency is? Is that something like a hurricane hitting the West Coast, East Coast? Is that something like, a bailout, a stimulus, yada, yada, yada? How do you define a national emergency? And do you support this bill?
I support the bill. I support Dr. Farris's approach was similar to Mark Levin's approach. I'll have to defer to Dr. Farris at his explanation a minute ago. I think it'd be very difficult to define. Therefore, within that amendment, balanced budget amendment, you put certain structural constraints. Therefore, you hold Congress accountable if they abuse that power.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But that's not what's on the table.
If I can add, that's the structure, that's the topical ruling of what's on the table. The exact language of the amendment would be written at the convention itself. And my version that I've just described to you would be perfectly legitimate at that convention.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. We have the affirmative time for cross.
Charlie, I have obtained a copy of your speech that you gave to the Stop Obamacare Now rally that's posted on your website. And you said in that there are three alternatives to the abuse of federal power. First, nullification that you've talked about. And then secondly, I'm quoting, if that doesn't work, we need to give serious consideration to secession. Then your third one is alternative, is which you clearly reject, is just giving in to the federal government. Neither of us are going to go with that alternative. So you believe, and I'm asking you, is this right? Do I understand you correctly? You believe it's more appropriate to deliberately destroy the Union through secession than it is to use Article 5?
No, actually, let's put it in the right order. I see that there's only three choices facing us as a nation today. Number one, we either bow our little heads and submit to the growing tyranny of the federal government. Number two, we work nullification and interposition where the state legislators stand between the tyranny of the federal government and the people. Or number three, secession. Now, that's the only three choices I see.
Okay.
Now, let me finish my answer here, please. It's only three choices I see. I believe nullification is the release valve, the relief valve or release valve for the building pressures towards secession. I'm not promoting secession other than a choice on the table. But the one I think will work is nullification if we all get behind it.
Charlie, if we were in court, I'd ask the judge to strike your answer as being non-responsive, so I'm going to ask you again. My question was, why is Article 5 a lesser choice to you than secession? That's the question I want an answer to.
Yeah, and that's an easy one to answer. For people that have looked at this for a long time, we know that over the last number of decades, there have been many progressive and liberal groups that have lusted after a Article 5 convention. Anyone wants to check that out, go to www.movetoamend.org. Over 400 liberal groups that have wanted this. Our objection, my objection to a Article 5 convention being reconvened is the risk of losing the Constitution or parts of it or our Bill of Rights and coming up with a document that will be more harmful than the harm we're under now.
Thank you. Now, speaking of nullification in liberal groups, I was the chairman of the group that wrote the law that's protecting Hobby Lobby right now. It's called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It has been used successfully by Hobby Lobby to say our religious freedom doesn't require us to obey the abortion provisions of the Obamacare legislation. Now, if nullification is correct, the liberal groups like in California, the state legislature in California could nullify the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and require Hobby Lobby to pay for abortions in California. Isn't that a valid use of nullification under your theory?
I don't believe it is.
Why not?
And let me get to that. And first off, I don't know that what you have constructed is going to be completely successful up to this point.
Well, it has been successful to now.
So far.
Yeah.
So far. It's still
Charlie,
going
if we could, I think we'd both do well if we just give succinct answers to my question. So the question is,
repeat it, please.
The question is it nullification? Why? You've said that California can't nullify a federal law, but the conservatives can nullify a federal law. Come on. No. If you're arguing that liberals want to amend the Constitution, I want to amend the Constitution, they got to go do their own thing. They got to go get 34 states. You want to nullify, they want to nullify. What's the difference? Shouldn't everybody be allowed to use the political process?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my question on that one. Now I'm going to ask another. Let's just understand nullification precisely. Okay. There's a bill in Oklahoma, as I understand it, that you want to nullify the penalties that individuals pay if they don't sign up for Obamacare. Now, the way the process works is if you have a penalty, Oklahoma will pay you back the penalty, and it won't come from taxpayer funds. Oklahoma will sequester money that the state of Oklahoma can't be from private businesses, but Oklahoma itself, it has employees, so it has to pay some money to the federal government. It would sequester the money and wouldn't pay that money to the federal government and would use that money to pay back the people. Now, my question is, that law would be declared unconstitutional by the federal court. The federal courts would order a levy on the bank accounts of Oklahoma, and when they levy the bank accounts and take the money from Oklahoma anyway, what are you going to do then?
Well, actually, again, it comes back to this concept that if Obamacare is outside of those enumerated powers, then the state of Oklahoma can nullify those by not being obedient to those.
But Charlie, you're not listening to my question. The question is, they took the money out of your bank account. They will do that. It is an absolute certainty. You can't prescribe processes that don't exist in the law. Unless we're just going to be entirely lawless, Charlie, you've got to follow the law. So you tell me a lawful process for Oklahoma to keep its money or get it back after the federal government levies on the bank accounts of the state of Oklahoma, because they will take the money. Tell me how you get it back lawfully, Charlie.
Well, there's not a certainty they will do that, But then it also brings up another problem that we have, which is a part of the overall scheme of making this work. And that is the fact that we have lost control of our state banks, or some degree of control, to the power of the federal government. Now, the money that's going to be sequestered is not from taxpayer money or businesses. It's from those excise taxes that the state government collects at some point in time. Now, there has been a bill also out here for all the citizens and businesses to pay their money to the state first and protect them that way. Now, it hasn't passed.
It hasn't passed, and neither of these have passed. And if they did pass, they would come levy on the bank accounts of all the private individuals and all the businesses of Oklahoma. And the question is, you couldn't get the money back. Charlie, it is a fantasy and you couldn't get the money back. So the question I have for Bob is this. You wrote that you think the Confederation Congress called the 1787 convention into being and gave its rules to the delegates. Where do you find that in the Articles of Confederation or in American history?
Actually, you do. It's the rules, which are, they're given in the February 21st, I believe the date is,
right.
1787. That was when the Continental Congress actually made the call, if I could use that word. And of course, now, like you point out accurately, other states were into this, so to speak, all right? But Congress was the one that made the call where most of the states actually responded. 12 out of the 13.
Bob, James Madison said that Congress didn't call the convention. This is in the first paragraph of Federalist 40. James Madison said the states called the convention. Their powers and authorities came from the state resolutions, from the state credentials. Why are you right and James Madison wrong on who called the convention?
I use the word call, all right? But in reality, you got to take a look at what the Continental Congress actually did. Excuse me, sir.
The Continental Congress didn't exist.
Gentlemen, we need to have one at a time. One at a time. Just stop for a minute. One at a time to talk, because these folks want to hear what's going on.
But he interrupted my answer.
Okay.
I'm saying both of you need to let. Now, if you can allow him to finish.
Sure, that's fine.
Thank you, Dr. Farris.
Sure.
Thank you, JT. Continental Congress went ahead and gave this letter to the various states saying, meet in Philadelphia. And they gave the date. I believe it was sometime in May. Then they said, we want to see the results. And you know what the convention did? They gave it back to Congress. You know what Congress did? They turned around and gave them to the states and said, convene state conventions. And that's not all they said. You see at that point, people generally did want a stronger central government. So there wasn't the contention, not so much, between the Congress, the delegates, and the whole bit. They cooperated. Today, there would be.
I mean, Bob, you've answered my question, and now you're just making a speech. My question to you is, why do you think the Continental Congress had anything to do with this? Because they didn't exist anymore. This is the Confederation Congress. This was under the Articles of Confederation. The Continental Congress had long ceased to exist. And my question again to you is this, and you didn't answer it. James Madison said correctly, and if you read the resolution from February 21st, 1787, Congress said, it is the opinion of Congress that it would be expedient to have a convention. And they endorsed the convention the states had already called. So why are you more of authority?
It's right here.
I've memorized the phrase. You can hold a book up, but you don't know what the words say, Bob.
I'd have to take a minute to look it up, but it's right here. Anybody who wants to see it, I'll show it to you. Really, it's right here. By the way, I'll also show you the minutes of Article 7, where they talked about how they wanted to ratify it.
Okay.
And they didn't like Article 13 out of the Articles of Confederation.
Okay. All right.
Yes, sir. Keep going.
All right.
Our time is done with that
Thank
part.
you.
And can we get the questions, please? That would be fun to do.
On your state there, are being disrespectful, and we come here, some decent men, discuss this decently. They are.
Thank you. Questions are going to be, we have 34 minutes for questions, so we'll start with those. And first question is going to go to the affirmative. Here's the question. Do you believe that the heart of man is desperately wicked? How does this impact your position on this issue?
The Bible says, All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Man is sinful. All men are sinful. That's the reason the government of the United States was structured the way it was, is because they had a Christian worldview about the nature of man when our government was created. We not only had checks and balances between the various branches of government, we had checks and balances between the state and federal level. They wanted limited government with exclusive powers, and we need to be able to follow that. That is why the founders believed that structure was the solution to sinful men. The material that my opponents have said is we don't have a structural problem, we've got a person problem. Folks, we never, ever are going to get over the person problem, ever. We're always going to have sinful men. Every one of Americans are going to have sinful men. We need to adopt the basic philosophy of the founders that the answer to sinfulness of men is proper structure, so that we do not give men unlimited power. We're not going to correct the heart of men. We have to have structures that limit their power.
The question again, do you believe that the heart of man is desperately wicked? And how does this impact your position on this issue?
It's absolutely correct. In fact, we do have structure. Our problem today is Congress is not enforcing the structure. Our founding fathers created mechanisms to rein in a runaway judiciary or to rein in a runaway executive branch. But Congress has ceded its power to do that today. And because they've ceded their power to do that, we have these runaway branches of government. The structure is already there. But because the people will not hold Congress's feet to the fire, our system is not working well today. But it's not a systemic problem, it's a people problem.
I'm supposed to get a 1 minute rebuttal.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to give you right now.
All right. I just want to repeat the last statement that Charlie gave you. We don't have a systemic problem. We have a people problem. So despite the fact that he says to you that he believes in the sinfulness of men, he believes if we get the right people in office, we're going to fix this. Folks, it is not going to happen. We will not get the right people in office. I have done as much as anybody in this country to elect good people to office over the years. I've run for office. I've campaigned for good people. I've raised money. I've sent thousands of kids out to campaign for people. If we think that trying to elect good people and send them to the mess of Washington, D.C. is going to work, we are absolutely out of our minds. And if we think that the nullification stuff that they're talking about is going to work broadly, it will work on a few things here or there, but you can't nullify away the going to war without a declaration of war. You can't nullify the national debt at the state level. It is fantasy to think that stuff will happen. And so I really believe that we need to make sure that we have structure and do not trust men that exist or men that we fantasize.
Okay. Next question. Some refer to a convention of states as a long-term resolution. Sorry, let me rephrase this. Some refer to a convention of states as a long-term solution. Sorry. What is your earliest estimate that a convention of states could bring fruit?
It can't. You have to understand today, the demographics of America and the people of America are very badly divided. The people in the northeastern part of this country, the people on the West Coast, people around the Great Lakes have a very, very different value system than the people in Oklahoma. Many people up there believe in socialism and aggressively want socialism. Many of them want to kill their babies. Many of them want to see homosexuals be able to be married. There is a completely different value system in those areas. And that's the reason that those areas will be sending delegates that will never approve of any amendment that would come out of a convention that make a positive difference, whether it's a balanced budget amendment or any other amendment out there to really make things improve. it will never, you're probably going to have 23 to 25 or more states that would shoot down anything. Hopefully, if the left gains control, hopefully you could come up with enough conservative states that would stop their agenda. But I'm telling you, once you convene a constitutional convention or convention of the states, you cannot control it. And it's just as likely to come up with bad results as it is with anything good. But anything good cannot be passed. No way.
You got 30 seconds.
By the way, this survey or this study from the Congressional Research Services, it concurs with what Charlie just said. When a convention convenes, you can't control it. This is what they say, not their exact words, but it's actually in here.
Thank you. Same question over here. Some refer to a convention of states as a long-term solution. What is your earliest estimate that a convention of states would bring fruit?
You know, that depends. Dr. Farris's plan is, I think, very optimistic and looks for a short term. My philosophy is that, that this took us 100 years plus to get here. And you think about electing people to change it. We've been trying that since income tax was, was passed as an amendment by Congress back in the early 19th, 20th century. So what I would ask you to do is look at those times in history where we've encountered similar situations. I would encourage you to read about the nullification crisis of the early 1800s. What happened was the federal government was essentially being tyrannical on a few states in the South, South Carolina specifically. And so they were imposing these tariffs about between state, interstate, using the tariffs to essentially push down on these states. Their economies were getting crushed. South Carolina said, that's enough. We're nullifying. They used the word nullifying. They looked back at the nullification of Alien Sedition Acts of 1789, and they said that, or 1798, I'm sorry, but they looked back at that time and said, well, James Madison said this, Thomas Jefferson said it, let's nullify, let's raise 100,000 troops, which they did, militia, and let's, at one point, they even considered seceding from the Union. And what did James Madison say to South Carolina? What do you think he said? He said, you're going down the wrong track. If you think I said nullification works without all the states coming together with regards to Alien Sedition Acts, you read my words, you read Thomas Jefferson's words wrong. Because what we were talking about is states, plural states, when it comes to the Kentucky resolutions, the Virginia resolutions. And he advised the same thing in 1830 when he wrote several public letters saying that Article 5, Convention of the States, is the solution for the nullification crisis in South Carolina. And when South Carolina sent an application to Congress for an Article 5 Convention of the States, Congress turned tail, lowered the tariffs,
Rob,
and a peaceable solution was
Rob, the question was, what is your earliest estimate, real briefly, what is your earliest estimate? Only one person can answer that. What is your earliest estimate that a convention of states could bring? By
2017.
2017, thank you. Okay. You guys have 1 minute to rebuttal.
Well, actually, the nullification effort by South Carolina actually created a compromise, and it was phased out over 10 years, those tariffs. So there's actually nullification that worked in that. And if we go back also, let's just look at nullification with the Alien Sedition Act that came out. That produced the Kentucky resolution and the Virginia resolution. Those were clearly nullification efforts. The other states didn't jump on board. They disagreed with nullification until Thomas Jefferson was president. And he puts an embargo on all products being shipped out of America. Then guess what? The states that didn't want nullification, all of a sudden, they were crying out for nullification now. It was kind of whose ox was getting gored, is what the reality of it is. Nullification is a workable deal, as long as we don't have people cutting the legs out from under people that are trying to do that.
Thank you. Next question. Would a new Constitution have a set of checks and balance like the checks and balance we have and which are being ignored?
Nobody's advocating a new Constitution. Article 5 says that the purpose of an Article 5 Convention of the States is to propose amendments. Exactly the same power that Congress has to propose amendments. The idea that we can't control the subject matter, something they assert as a matter of absolute fact, they're just wrong. They cannot prove that as a matter of absolute fact because we've never had one. And so people have their opinions as to what it would be, whether it would be controlled or not, including some young lawyer who works for the Congressional Research Service. Those people write stuff about the Common Core that I laugh at, about UN treaties I laugh at and I defeat. There are a lawyer who works for Congress. Why am I going to believe them? Why is all of a sudden we're going to believe, some young lawyer in Congress? I don't care what they say. By the way, the 41 laws he keeps, they're all defeated. So there is no rule from Congress that controls the process. We have historical precedent. We're either going to have historical precedent that we follow through the rules, and that historical precedent is one state, one vote. 32 interstate conventions in the history of America. Most before the Constitution, a few after that. Every single time, one state, one vote. The courts have, when Article 5 has been litigated, and I am one of the few people in this country who's ever successfully litigated an Article 5 case, stopping Congress from abusing the Article 5 process with regard to the Equal Rights Amendment. We stop them from improperly using Article 5, and there are weapons in our warfare that can stop them from abusing the process. It will be one state, one vote. The states appoint the delegates. It will not be proportional because that's the historical practice. You have historical practice on one side. You have vain imaginations on the other. They have absolutely nothing more than a Congressional Research Service attorney. I'll take James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and the Federalist Papers on my side. If they want to have congressional research on their side, let them have it.
Next, the same question. Would a new Constitution have a set of checks and balances like the checks and balances we now have and which are being ignored?
Dr. Leslie is actually proposing a whole new Constitution. Of course, anybody can, right? But believe it or not, it's done. You know the whole issue about ignoring our checks and balances? Our root problem is that we, the people, are the foundation for the true checks and balances. And while you're here and engaged and looking, many of our neighbors are not. They're home, they're watching TV, they're living their lives, but they're not engaged in the process. And we have the fox guarding the hen house. That's the root of our problem. We as citizens need to get engaged. The checks and balances are still on the books. We have to enforce them, and if we don't, then we get these people get elected office for their own personal endearment and power. That's our root problem right there. We need to get engaged. The problem's not our Constitution. I love our Constitution. The document is fine. We're just allowing our elected officials to ignore it. All right, so now, as for this record here in Congress, my whole point about the 41 laws, or 41 bills, thank you, is Congress does not believe, plenty of members of Congress do not believe that they're limited to a date and a place. Understand, that's the whole point. And next time, those bills were not defeated. They just got ignored after a while. Okay, because they weren't needed. They'll bring them back, folks. Do you really believe that Congress is going to pass up the opportunity? See, that's what matters. Do you think Congress is going to have tea and crumpets while we determine how they're going to operate? Not anymore. Not anymore. I don't trust them. I don't believe it. They came out with 41 bills. Why wouldn't they do it again?
Okay. Rebuttal?
First of all, there was an earlier reference that Bob made that to the House Judiciary Chairman. That's Bob Goodlatte. He's a friend of mine. I've sat in his office and talked to him about Article 5. And he is completely on our side, and he completely believes that Article 5 conventions are one state, one vote, and Congress has no authority other than the authority to name the time and the place. So I don't know where he's getting his information. I've talked directly to the man who's in charge. And you can read Congressional Research Service. You're talking about the chairman of the Judiciary Committee 30 and 40 years ago. Well, duh, those people aren't there anymore. Or, does Bart Simpson's way of saying it? Thomas Jefferson would say, we hold that truth to be self-evident. And so it's same thing, just different eras. The reality is that the states control the process. The states control the process. The states control whether or not we call it, because you have to have 34 states agree on the subject matter. States write the language, states ratify. All Congress does...
Time is up. Time is up. Next question over here. If we are successful in adopting a new amendment, what will keep Washington, D.C. from ignoring it?
This is why Article 5 is really not a state solution. It technically starts off in the states, but you're calling calling another constitutional convention or amending convention, whatever you want to call it. And once that's convened, you're going to try to produce a product to then tell Congress to do something that it's not doing already. And simply because they do not respect the Constitution or the rule of law today is the very reason that whatever we might produce, if it would be quality and if it could be ratified, it won't be long before they find a way around it. So absolutely it won't work.
Okay. Over here, same question. If we are successful in adopting a new amendment, what will keep Washington, D.C. from ignoring it?
That's a good question. I hear that on the side of opposition to the Convention of States. When you look at the amendments, actually Congress does follow the amendments. They followed, you could talk about the Bill of Rights, but for the first 100 years, and I've heard Dr. Farris and others say this, for the first 100 years, we do follow the amendments over time, but what if we got an amendment for a balanced budget amendment that they followed for 100 years? I think that would help us get out of the bind we're in. I did want to read one thing with regards to the nullification crisis. I'm not against that, as Charlie knows, but I question whether it would really get us out of the fix we're in. But if you read James Madison's words from 1830, he said, should the provisions of the Constitution as here reviewed be found not to secure the government and rights of the states against usurpations and abuses on the part of the U.S., the final resort within the purview of the Constitution lies in an amendment of the Constitution according to a process applicable by the states. In other times within the book that Bob has over there, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson both can be quoted as flabbergasted, in a word from today, in the idea that we would secede or nullify versus an Article 5 convention. That's why they put it in there. And so would I guess the basic question, go back to that, would they follow the amendment? We have followed those amendments. We do so for at least 100 years. Wouldn't it be quite a change, a refreshing change, if we could control the tax and spending of the federal government for 100 years? I think that's a pretty lofty goal in itself. I'd probably take 10 years. I think if you look at the last few years since the last convention came close in 1983, and I'm sure Mike has the exact numbers on this, but trillions of dollars. Imagine if we'd had that balanced budget amendment and we had followed it from 1983 till now. And I'll let Dr. Farris address these numbers. He knows it better than I do. But how many trillions of dollars would we have saved? So if it just lasted that long, wouldn't that be something?
Okay. All right. 1 minute rebuttal.
Do that. I believe it's... I lost my train of thought here.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah.
The question is, wrong question. If we are successful in adopting a new amendment, what will keep Washington, D.C. from ignoring it?
Yeah, but it was something I was going to spin off of what Rob said there. And I lost it. I'm sorry.
The answer, folks, is nothing. You see, the only thing that'll ever stop the courts in D.C. and, and Congress and the runaway president and all that is us, the people. We need to rise up. Folks, we need to stand up together. We need to get our friends and neighbors engaged in the process of activism. Get the right folks elected at the state level so that they can run for national. We need to start locally and fix it and then work our way up. Unless we, the people, rise and do something, I don't care what we have as a written document, they will take advantage of us.
Time is up. Thank you. This question is specifically to Senator Standridge. If you could change 3 things in the Constitution, what would they be?
directed that to me instead of the constitutional attorney.
The rules allow us to decide which one's going to answer the question. So I'm going to answer the question.
Go right ahead.
Counselor.
You know, if you have a pharmacy question or a state legislative question, ask him. If you want to talk about constitutional law, talk to the guy that's been teaching it for 14 years and practicing it for 36 years. The first thing I'd want is an exclusive jurisdiction rule, that there is no such thing as concurrent jurisdiction. The General Welfare Clause gives concurrent jurisdiction, and in that lies the problem. It should read that Congress shall have no authority to spend any domestic money on any topic that is within the jurisdictional competence of the states. And you have a parallel provision about that in the Commerce Clause. Second, I would want to change how we control the Supreme Court, who appoints the Supreme Court. The European Court of Human Rights has 46 countries, 46 justices. Each country appoints their own justice. They have a system of panels and other things. Very efficient court. I don't like their outcomes, but their processes are appropriate. And we could do the same thing in the United States. 50 Supreme Court justices for a term of 8 years. The states, no repeats. The states appoint one justice each on a rotating basis. They could have panels and so on. You change who appoints the Supreme Court, you change everything. The third thing I would want is to have a rule that says Americans make the law for America. And we no longer allow treaties that are controlling the domestic policy of the United States ever to have any impact on the national domestic law. All those things I just recited, all good ideas, you like them, you can never accomplish any of them through nullification. It's utterly impossible.
Okay. Same question over here. If you could change 3 things in the Constitution, what would they be?
Actually, I'm going to take 3 suggestions that came from our founding fathers during the state conventions. The concerns they had. Number 1, we have criminal trial juries, criminal trials by jury, but not civil trials. They saw that as a problem because an aristocracy would arise, corporatism we might call it today, you know, and that whole bit. Do we have runaway corporations, folks? That was actually foreseen. The General Welfare Clause is actually too loose. And there's actually, and again, right there, Founding Fathers said it. Another one I would change is the direct taxation of the citizens. Many of the anti-federalists saw that as a problem. They saw the states getting weakened and the federal government becoming dominant and stronger because of the ability to directly tax. Instead, they should tax the state governments, and the state governments pay it. The state government should collect it from its people. That way the state stays in the middle as the guardians of the people, which is their rightful place. And that's where these folks, these very wise gentlemen who gave us Constitution, this is some of the ideas that they were concerned about.
Okay. I'm going to add one more to that.
You can't.
Okay. I thought he only did 2.
Yes. Your rebuttal?
Yeah. Well, I'm not familiar with you.
Look in the index. Look in the index. Look in the index.
I'm just reading a few from the Constitution.
This is rebuttal.
All right.
This is rebuttal.
The 7th Amendment says, in suits at common law where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. When you say there's no right to trial by jury in civil cases, you don't know the Constitution, Bob. And I would simply say to you that if we're going to let people who kind of know the Constitution make the suggestions to you as about what we should do, they kind of know American history, but they don't really know the full details of it. I have read the credentials of every state. I have seen the legislation of every state that appointed the Constitutional Convention. I have read the entire ratification records. I have read multiple times the entire records of the Constitutional Convention. I teach this, I practice this. These men are well-meaning, but they're trying to prescribe problems that require years of study and knowledge that I've devoted 40 years of my life to.
Your time is up.
And they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay. Next question. What kind of situation are we in if liberals do this first?
Again, you go back to the ratification process. If liberals do this first and they create a Constitutional Convention and they produce a product, and it's liberal and it's harmful, it's worse than what we have. It could, for example, require balancing the budget through tax increases. If that occurs, you just hope that there's enough conservative states that won't ratify it, that it dies. If there isn't enough conservative states that won't ratify it, then we've made things a lot worse. It's kind of an interesting thing. I was actually the author of a balanced budget amendment resolution a number of years ago. It got to the state party platform, and of the 50-some pages, my one-sentence resolution, which said, we call for a balanced budget amendment with all balancing to be done by spending cuts, not tax increases. Guess what? One issue was the one that was pulled out of that 50-some page document to debate. And after enormous amount of debate on that issue, we could not get that passed in the state of Oklahoma at the Republican Party. That's a conservative red state, and we couldn't even pass it there. James Langford said the reason they couldn't come up with a balanced budget amendment with the Gang of Eight and the sequester thing is because the Republicans in Congress couldn't agree on the wording on the thing. I'm telling you, this is something that's not going to ever happen. If it improves things, has teeth in it, to make things better.
Okay. Same question. What kind of situation are we in if liberals...
Yeah, and this is another kind of fear mongering, if for lack of a better term. 13 states are all required to not ratify any amendment that is proposed. We have 27 states that are Republican legislatures on both sides. You can't, there's never going to be, I don't even see in the foreseeable future where you wouldn't have at least 13 other states, whether even you're talking about something simple liberal idea of, you know, Wolfpack that wants to do the campaign finance reform. I can guarantee you that 25 states will say no to that. But I want to hop back real quick because I think as a student of history, I think when you look back at the nullification crisis, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it really reminds me of the times we're in today, because the same things that we're talking about here were talked about there, and secession and war were the ultimate goals of those folks that wanted to nullify and secede. So let me read what really led to the compromise in 1832. Let me read you the resolution that South Carolina sent to Congress in late in 1832 that read. It says, resolved that it is expedient that a convention of the states be called as early as practical to consider and determine such questions of disputed power as have arisen between the states of this confederacy and the general government. That is what led to the compromise over the overreaching tariffs that the federal government was imposing on the South in the late 1820s and 1830s. That is what led to the compromise, and that is what led to a resolution of a problem that did not lead to secession or war or militia going to fight American against American. What we need to look at today is not secession, and we can look at nullification for some things, but this is a huge problem that we're facing. This calls, as Dr. Farris said earlier, a big solution. And a big solution, as our founders would tell you today if they were here, I can almost feel their spirit in this room. They would tell you that an Article 5 Convention of the States to amend the Constitution is exactly what they would propose to rein in the federal government.
Your time is up, Senator. Thank you. 1 minute rebuttal.
Please repeat the question.
What kind of situation are we in if liberals do this first?
Frankly, it doesn't matter whether it's liberals or conservatives that initiate the process, because ultimately it comes down to who sets the rules. Because who sets the rules determines the outcome. And let me ask you something. Do you trust Harry Reid and John Boehner to do the right thing? You see, they're going to have their own agenda. It doesn't matter who initiates it, right? We can't control this whole thing that way. Not from where we're at within the state. The only thing we can do is decide whether we want to give the power to Congress to initiate it. Do you trust them with that power? Oh, by the way, yesterday, Dr. Farris said that should any of these 41 laws, let's say, forgive my paraphrase here, should Congress pass any laws, and he would take them to the Supreme Court. Do you trust the same Supreme Court that passed Obamacare? All right, this whole judicial review thing. Do you trust that same Supreme Court to defend these laws?
Bob, thank you very much. That was the last question.
We have time for one more question. You got 4 more minutes.
Oh, I thought you were telling me we were done. Okay. All right. One more. Goodness gracious. Let me get one I can read. Okay. Let's do this. Am I over with you guys? Okay. Well, that's good because this is to the affirmative. It says here, it's kind of a lengthy question, but just listen. Both sides agree that our federal government is oppressive and out of control. Both sides concede that implementing their option will not be easy. Both sides point out weaknesses in the alternative option and believe their option is best to address the federal government's overreach. However, those who support nullification are working to kill all Oklahoma legislating relating to Article 5. Are Article 5 supporters actively lobbying to kill all nullification legislation in our state? Aren't Oklahomans best served by moving forward with both options, especially since many, including the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institution, question the constitutionality of nullification as a tool to address all areas of federal government outreach?
Amen to that question. I've got a new video. Homeschool Legal Defense Association that I started and run has a new video coming out urging the nullification of the Common Core across the country. And so I'm actively working on those kinds of activities where it makes sense, where it's an adequate weapon, where it's appropriate. I'm a team player on that. I'm not throwing rocks at nullification. I'm just saying it's not a weapon that serves all purposes. When everybody comes around selling medical cures to me that supposedly cure everything, I don't trust it. And anybody that says that we can control everything through any of these processes is crazy. But there are big solutions in our vantage point. There are particular battles that need to be fought, and nullification would be successful in particular battles. They're very important, like Common Core. One's a rifle and one's more of a shotgun. But you need both kinds of weapons. And what I would say we should do is stop throwing stones at each other. I would gladly take that position. Stop throwing stones at each other. And Charlie, I'd be really happy if you just simply said, rather than secession as your second choice, destroying the Union as your second choice, Civil War as your second choice, I'd like to see you say Article 5 is your second choice and nullification is your first choice. That's what I would hope. And you guys keep saying that Congress is going to control the process. You know what? If Congress tries to control the process, I'm going to see to it that we nullify them.
We're both in agreement about nullification.
I wanted to correct a term. I'm getting tired of the Common Core term. I think we should call it Obama Core.
Well, here's the question again.
I thought it was state governors.
Here's the question again. Both sides agree that our federal government is oppressive and out of control. Both sides concede that implementing their option will not be easy. Both sides point out weaknesses in the alternative option and believe their option is the best to address the federal government's overreach. However, those who support nullification are working to kill all Oklahoma legislation relating to Article 5. Question: are Article 5 supporters actively lobbying to kill all nullification legislation in our state? Aren't Oklahomans best served by moving forward with both options, especially since many, including the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute, question the constitutionality of nullification as a tool to address all areas of federal government overreach?
Yeah. Well, there are organizations. Judge Napolitano believes that nullification is a valid thing. The 10th Amendment Center, many historians believe that nullification is a valid thing. Certainly, Dr. Thomas E. Woods, a great book you really need to read, Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. The reality of it is, our opposition to an Article 5 convention is to protect what we have and not lose it, to protect the Bill of Rights, protect the Constitution, the system that we have. That's the reason we oppose it. Now, if you'd have been at OPAC yesterday, you would have found that the proponents of this are quite willing to attack not only the concept of nullification, but attack the people behind it and the organizations behind nullification. The reason is this, folks. There's not enough energy to do both. You've got to choose one or the other because one pulls against the other. And that's why we have this division. We all agree, same problem. We agree on the problem. We have a different solution to it. And we believe that if our opponents would come to our side and lend their energy to it, we could get this done.
1 minute rebuttal.
Charlie, the reason we opposed, in your mind, nullification yesterday, we oppose it as a panacea to areas where it cannot possibly work. Illegal wars, the General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, there's a number of areas where it cannot possibly work. I don't like people misleading people that it will work. And I don't like people, and you guys have not used this argument at all tonight. You used it yesterday and you use it in your writings. The John Birch Society you're both members of and leaders of use it regularly. You argue that the Constitution was illegally adopted. Yesterday you said that George Washington and other Federalists were just like the statists of today. You can't make your ultimate arguments without demeaning both the legality of the Constitution and the legitimacy of our founding fathers. And I want to say on record, I support the founding fathers. I support the Constitution. I don't believe it was illegal.
Time is up, sir. Thank you very much. Next, we have our rebuttal speeches, 4 minutes per side. We start with the negative first, and it can go either one, or you can share the time.
Okay, I think the important thing here is to understand, let's talk about the status of the day. The status of that day are different than the status of the day, of today. But the Federalists of that day were the statist of that day. If you think not, I would urge you to start reading these books. I would urge you to read this book over here. I would urge you to read these books because almost everyone here is probably a product of the government schools or a victim of the government educational system. And therefore, your understanding of history is going to be very, very incomplete, if not misdirected. The reality of it is human nature and sin nature being what it is. People like Adams, who were great people wanting liberty from the tyranny of King George, once they were able to get that liberty and then they got into power, before you know it, they were exercising tyranny themselves. And it was the anti-federalists that were after liberty at that point in time. Human nature is what it is. The best rules, the best system in the world will not control people who have ill motives and people that want to rule over people's lives. In this country today, unfortunately, we're very divided. Madison actually said in a letter to Tuberville that we should never call for another constitutional convention. And this occurred, by the way, right after the ratification process, because Virginia was immediately calling for another constitutional convention. New York followed 3 months after that. And what Madison said, we should never have another one of these in times of great division in our country and great emotional stress. I ask you today, is there any division in our country today? Look at the last election. Do you really believe the people of this country today, particularly in certain parts of this country today, have the ability for self-government anymore? I would suggest to you that in the ideas of our founding fathers and the competitiveness that they wanted among the union of states was that a state that would deliver the necessary government to maintain order at the least cost to the citizens while allowing the greatest amount of liberty is what they wanted to have states to be able to compete for. And those states that did a good job for that would be where people would want to live. And the states that want to kill their babies, they want to marry homosexuals, and they want to be socialists, people want to live like that, they'll go there. I'm not talking about a split of the union, but I'm talking about the competitiveness of the states. But when the federal government rises up and steps on all of them and demands sameness from everyone, we can't have that competitiveness. And that's what nullification will do. It will create certain parts of the country where people will want to live. And the more people that want to live with liberty and move there, that makes those states stronger. It's tough, folks. We're in serious problems. There's no way out of this without pain and problems. I don't have all the answers to what lies ahead of us, because we don't know what kind of response the federal government will have. But I know what kind of response we need to have. We need to start telling the federal government on its unconstitutional laws and edicts that it passes, no, no, and hell no. And by the way, that's a good biblical word that isn't used nearly enough in many pulpits today. And that's what we need to begin to tell the federal government on its unconstitutional measures. Where it's all going from there, I don't know, because we don't know what kind of pushbacks that they're going to be. But it's better than laying down and submitting to the tyranny.
Thank you. 4 minutes for your rebuttal.
Thank you. I admire Charlie and Bob very much. I think their ability to activate people is admirable. But sometimes I feel like it's a bit ironic. So on one hand, I feel like there's a white flag in fear of an Article 5 convention, and the other hand is a sledgehammer for our state legislatures. I feel like that sometimes. But that being beside the point, I like his comment about anti-federalists, because my hero as an anti-federalist here tonight must be Mason, George Mason, who is the man solely responsible, our founder, for crafting and proposing the Article 5 ability for states to convene to amend the Constitution. He was an anti-federalist. He realized that the federal government could be out of control, and he proposed that. It was unanimous. There was no dissent whatsoever, and it is now in our Constitution today for this very reason.
Charlie says he's not trying to break up the Union, but when he gives a speech to the Obama Tea Party rally, and he has on his website today, right now today, it's on his website, secession is the second alternative. And the way he talks about other regions of the country, that's breeding a spirit of isolation of various parts of this country. Because I defend homeschoolers everywhere, I know people in every state. And I know people who love liberty in every state. And I don't need to win a majority. God has never worked through majority. God works through remnants. And I can tell you for an absolute fact, there are 4,000 legislative districts in the 40 states we're targeting for a convention of the states. There are 75% of that number is 3,000. You give me 100 people in 3,000 districts, that's only 300,000 people, 1/10 of 1% of the American population. It is probable that we can deliver the kinds of amendments I've been describing for you tonight. You give me 1,000 people in 3,000 districts, 3 million people, 1%, a little less than 1% of the American population. I guarantee you I have the political forces they're assembled to deliver victory on all the big things that we're talking about tonight. I don't need to badmouth other states. I don't need to badmouth. God's got people everywhere. Freedom's got people everywhere. And the day we start talking secession and start badmouthing other places in the country, and I'm not, badmouth the government all you want in the other country. The people of California voted to keep traditional marriage. The people of Hawaii voted to keep traditional marriage. The people of every state that have voted, over 40 states have voted to keep traditional marriage. You got problems with the government? I got problems with the government too. I do not have trouble with the people of the United States. Their website contains distrust and mistrust of the Constitution of the United States. A friend of mine's here today, heard them debate a year ago. Their debate was all about the Constitution was illegally adopted, runaway convention, all this nonsense. It's anti-historical tripe. And you've got the back and front piece of paper that proves to you that it's anti-historical tripe. And you notice they didn't really harp on it tonight. They know it's a weak argument, but it's the argument the John Birch Society and others have been using for 40 years to breed fear in the hearts of Americans. It ran away the last time, and it will run away again. Folks, you cannot be a constitutionalist and believe the Constitution was improperly adopted. If you think it's illicit in the first place, You're really not a constitutionalist. In fact, you're a constitutionalist when you believe that it was the right thing to do and it was done in the right way. You got to have both. I believe it's the right thing to do and it was done in the right way. I stand with the Constitution and with the Founding Fathers, including Article 5.
Point of order, JT. Point of order.
That's it. You will get to do the closing summation, so you guys have the closing summation. 4 minutes.
And that's it, right?
And then they have 4 minutes.
Well, didn't they just go twice?
No, they just did their rebuttal speech. You did yours first. Then they did
But
theirs.
they both spoke.
You can both speak. Charlie
divided
just took
our
all your time.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlie just took all your time. So now you have, once you start, you'll have 4 minutes.
All right, no, fair
and they'll
enough.
have 4 minutes, and then we'll be done.
Fair enough, I'll start. Ladies and gentlemen, something I'd very much like you to be aware of. Notice how Dr. Farris made reference to they and their website, and he spoke about the John Birch Society. Please understand, I can't speak for the John Birch Society. I'm a member. I'm just a computer guy. Okay, when you get right down to it. I'm not authorized to speak for the John Birch Society. And I wondered why yesterday he was attacking us so much as being enemies of the Constitution, his words, and the idea of bringing up our cowardice in the whole bit. And it was rather aggressive on the attacks to come down today. And I realized something. I watched the Convention of the States website, and I saw it said that they were coming here to debate the John Birch Society, which is not true. Okay, we're just speaking of ourselves. Okay. What I fear, though, now on that same article he said, Dr. Farris said, or the author of the article, that this video is going to be on their website. Well, I would encourage, and I hope, the video doesn't get edited, and everybody out there who looks at it sees 41. Congress and their 41 laws, their bills, I should say. I fear they become laws eventually, should we actually call for a convention. I hope that word does get out unedited. Now, why do I think this is going on? Why do I think he's doing that? Because so far, Georgia has agreed to this convention. They've applied. 3 other states have declined so far. The home state of Dr. Farris, Virginia, even though he went down to a state legislator and visited, they still rejected it. Oklahoma, of course, recently Utah. At that rate, with legislators coming on board, it was not going to happen. Montana and South Dakota? All right, I haven't read about that. But you see, at that rate, what's going to happen is it's going to fail. Their efforts are not going to work. And I think they've decided they have to attract the John Birch Society. Now, in all these presentations you saw about nullification and all that, guess what? That's not the official response of the John Birch Society. I've avoided giving the official response. I actually have it right here. This was given to me by the CEO of the John Birch Society, Art Thompson. It was never brought up. I hope that shows too. You see, everything presented here has nothing to do with the John Birch Society. Sir, in all integrity, I hope that when you present this video, as you said you're going to, that you don't tie it to the John Birch Society, because it's not in here. This is the official position. If anybody wants it, I'll give it to you. Please give me your contact information, and it's a brief call. I'll tell you what it is. No problem. I don't mean to hide it. But I meant to keep it from this debate. I think he's using this for marketing. We were all tools. Really. I fear that. Because Oklahoma's already turned it down. Now, he'll say otherwise. Of course, Dr. Farris will. He'll disagree with me and give his reasons. Okay? But understand, Oklahoma's already turned it down. Just be aware of that. Your organization, Norman Tea Party, I fear as you get more and more successful, you too will be attacked. This is how it's done. People have this idea in the back of their mind. John Birch Society, weren't they controversial? And they can't exactly remember why. This is how it's done, folks. This is how it's done. If, as you get more and more successful, you get attacked. I'm afraid, I just fear this is what's happening here. Sir, please post the full video, both days, unedited.
Thank you, Bob. You have.
Thank you. I would like to correct a couple things. I think that the premise of that discussion is totally false. Dr. Farris is here on my personal invitation. He is here because I researched this issue as a legislator in this state, that I feel like we have a major problem. We've got to find a big solution. I have the utmost respect since meeting with Dr. Farris. I am no member, no part of Convention of States. I invited him here because I believe he's an expert and can talk well on this topic. That's the end of that. And you know, when you listen to the opposition, and again, I'll repeat that I have highest admiration for these folks. You hear the word fear so often that you begin to wonder, why do we bring this up? Because we certainly ought to have a fear of a runaway federal government because we have one. What can they do over the coming years? There is no telling. Why are we afraid of what our founders gave us? I've read you the words of what our founders said about on Article 5. If they were here today, I mean, you can feel them in the room, I think I can. They would tell you that a convention of the states is exactly what they would propose and that they would encourage, certainly before they would say to go to war or secession or civil war. We've gone that road. We have not the unifying thing to take us down that road today, but we do have an Article 5 Convention of the States. I'll turn this over to Dr. Farris to close.
Bob, I have to respond to your attack on my character. I believed until the day before yesterday that I was coming here to debate the president of the John Birch Society. That's what originally Charlie and I were going to debate, and then it transmogrified into the president of the John Birch Society. And I thought until day before yesterday that I was debating the president of the John Birch Society. I legitimately believe that, and there's an email trail to prove it. And if you want to attack me on flimsy evidence and accuse my character, then just go right ahead. You say it's all about marketing? We're planning to put the video up for free to anybody who watches it. You won't give them the position of the John Birch Society unless they sign up and give you your email address. Maybe the pot's calling the kettle black, and I would simply suggest you're the marketeer and I'm not in this particular situation. So go ahead with your character attacks if you want. I resent the character attacks on the founding fathers far more than I resent the character attacks on me. But it's character attacks, fear, guilt by association, nonsense about liberals going to try to change the Constitution. If the liberals can get 34 states to pass a resolution applying for a convention for purposes that they want, more power to them. It's a free country. There's not any bills pending anywhere. His recitation of the states, he's blended the balanced budget amendment applications with our application for a convention of the states. It failed in Virginia. All the other things he talked about were balanced budget amendment applications where we're not involved at all. We've passed it in Georgia, the House in Alabama, the House in Alaska. We repassed it in the Senate House Committee in Arizona today again after passing the whole House previously. This is moving. We've only been at this for about 8 months now. This is going to happen. I need your help. I need the support of people who want to restore constitutional government. I do not oppose nullification. I support nullification when used as a valid weapon in a valid process. I don't want to mislead people to say you can solve everything that way, because you can't. And I don't want to mislead people or attack people's character. I attack ideas, and I resent the fact that the John Birch Society and these men both, on their individual writings on the web that I have copies of, have attacked the integrity of the Constitution of the United States by saying the delegates disobeyed their instructions and they changed illegally the ratification process. Stop attacking the Constitution. Let's use it and save this country.
Your time is up. Folks.
My name's been on the website for more than 2 days.
Our time is up. Our time is up. Our time is up. Thank you there, Bob. The spirited debate is finished. And books were recommended, and I'm going to recommend a book too. This is called The United States Constitution. It also has the Articles of Confederation in it as well. And so I would encourage you guys to look at that and the Declaration of Independence. Most people haven't even read the Articles of Confederation, but boy, I tell you what, it's an educational thing. So I would recommend that everybody educate themselves on Article 5 and on nullification, and we'll just see what's going to happen in the future.